term awareness is so funny to me. It's Mental Health Awareness Month, and I think a lot of people who struggle with mental health are aware of it, but that's not what the term is for. I think often people want to talk about the diseases and they want people to be aware, and I think everybody's super aware of mental health. I want people to be aware of the other side of mental health. I've seen both sides of the coin. I have had the psychologist who sabotaged my life, I feel, nearly killed me, and then I've had the therapist who quite literally saved my life. I first dealt with mental health issues, well, I've dealt with it my whole life. I didn't realize it though, until I was 15 years old and I was in the hospital for 32 weeks, over 2 years. And at one point I was there 18 weeks straight. I was kept in one room for 18 weeks. There was like no view. The window was a wall. I had had an unfortunate experience in the hospital. Could have probably been classified as medical malpractice, but that's not even the purpose of this. I went into ICU psychosis, and I first started on antipsychotics at the age of 15. Prior to that, I had never dealt with anything like this. I think the most I'd ever had was Tylenol. I was a very happy girl, a very energetic girl, even though I was already dealing with emotional abuse at this point. When you mixed the trauma of the hospital, the quietness, aloneness of being in a room by myself for hours and hours on end, it all added up, and I ended up, snapping, I guess you could say. When I came back home, I was expected to just adapt to life, back to my abuse at home. So I had this weird situation where I was abused at home. I was traumatized in the hospital, and then I was put back into the abuse, and I started to have all kinds of mood swings, which who wouldn't if they're dealing with the aftermaths of trauma? Who wouldn't if they're dealing with abuse, period, by the way. I was assigned this awful psychologist who labeled me with bipolar disorder after this, which a good psychologist would have never jumped right to that, having known that I was just traumatized in a hospital. This is clearly symptoms of PTSD. But this psychologist was not. He did not have my best interest at heart. And so I saw the very ugly side of mental health. I was prescribed lots of medications that I didn't need, excessive amounts of them, and I suffered for years in silence at the hand of mental health professionals. I ran away from home. The first thing I did was find a psychiatrist to help me detox off the medications that I knew at this point were just being weaponized against me. Not every person who is on medication is having it weaponized against them. So I want to be clear with that. But that was what was going on with me. So as the psychiatrist was hearing my story and evaluating the meds, which she was just shocked at the amount of meds I had been given. And by the way, this was at the hand of a psychologist who was friends with a doctor, and the psychologist would tell the doctor what to prescribe me, which is absolutely unethical. If he were still practicing, I would have his license, but he's not. Lucky him. So when my psychiatrist heard all of this, by the grace of God, she said, you need to see a therapist more than anything. And she was happy to work with me on being on an antidepressant if I wanted, but she said, like, ultimately it was clear that I needed therapy. And someone had moved in down the street from her not that long prior. It's gonna make me cry. She gave me the card of this woman, and I was like, no, I've had bad experiences with a psychologist. But I said, okay, yeah, thanks, appreciate that, just help me get off all these meds that I don't need. And I didn't see that therapist for a long time. I went off of those medications, and I did a lot of it probably faster than the psychiatrist would have wanted me to, but I was just ready to be myself again. I wanted to be myself again, who I'd been prior to all of this happening to me. But you can't just bounce back to who you were prior to abuse and trauma. That's not how it works. So I was having panic attacks, excessive panic attacks. I remember one time coming home, I was driving the car, I thought I was dying, and I went into the house, and I was in an apartment. My roommate was there, and I was going in just like barely able to breathe. She's like, are you okay? And I just ran to the room. I locked my door, then I went to my bathroom, locked that door. I heard my roommate banging on the door, and I just turned on the shower, and I sat there and I sobbed And I realized, like, this might be rock bottom. I think this is what they call rock bottom. Years of abuse at so many people's hands had caught up to me, and the only thing I could think of was that card. I had put it in I remember it was in my drawer with my hair stuff at the bottom of it, and I remember grabbing the card, and it called the number, and I actually got the therapist, and she was like, I'm happy to do an intake, and I just told her a little bit about what I was dealing with, and she said, yeah, the first session's on me. When I first sat in her couch, I just burst out crying, sobbing. I realized I was in the presence of someone who was going to hear me for me, and not from what my stepmom was telling her and what this crooked psychologist was telling her. And I said, I feel like I have been wrongly diagnosed with bipolar disorder. I have been detoxing off of all these medications that, thanks to this doctor who's working with me. I'm alone in Florida, and I'm lost, and everything is catching up to me. And I can barely afford to do this. And she said that she was happy to work with me on the pay. She had a sliding scale. And I chose at this point to sacrifice things to go to therapy. I didn't drink alcohol. I paid for therapy. I didn't eat out a lot. I paid for therapy. I was working 3 jobs at the time. So I was a server, I was nannying, and I was cleaning houses. I was trying to pay for an apartment, trying to get into school. And I was going to sacrifice what I needed to get into that therapist, because I knew, I could just sense like this woman wants to help me. I've been with her for 9 years. There were times when I couldn't afford, and she would be like, well, just put on your tab and you can pay me when you can pay me. And I now make 6-figure salary, thanks to her, really, and God. I tried to pay her back, and she never would let me pay her back. And I had sent a lot of people to her. I advocated, saying this is the power of therapy. And she at one point was like, Sarah, I can't take any more customers or clients. I have so many. And to this day, I feel this woman is an angel. I have an appointment with her tomorrow, actually. I see her every week at this point. We're working through some stuff, and it has saved my life. Guys, it has saved my life. There have been times that... All of this to say, there are highs and there are lows with mental health. The awareness that isn't talked about enough is that there is no fix for mental damage. That little girl that I was trying to get back to, she's there, but she's forever altered. And the beauty of mental health therapy, working through things, is you can find her again amongst all of the other parts of yourself that have been created due to the traumas that you've gone through. And life will look different. And I think some of us have this expectation that will just be normal one day. And it's all about redefining normal, redefining strength, redefining a lot of things that you thought would look one way, and they end up looking another way. And that doesn't mean that I'm not happy. I have a lot of days that I'm actually very happy. And I have days that I'm sad. It's learning to say it's okay that you're sad. It's a normal emotion. I see my therapist, like I said, right now every week. There are times I go every other week. There's times I've gone once a month. It ebbs and flows with my mental health, but I have someone that I can be very honest and vulnerable with, and that's the key. If you can find that, you've hit the lottery. I feel like God led me to her. The events leading up to me meeting her was incredible, but that's mental health. Mental health is knowing that it's not what you expect, but there is a form of hope amongst all the other rubble that you deal with in your life. And I guess the ultimate goal will be to finally define happiness and peace, which I'm working on.